Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Nicole Nachtman? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll start with the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. In 1994, a man named Ronald Nachtman was in a romantic relationship with a woman named Miriam. The couple lived in Texas. Miriam was in the process of getting a divorce and had 2 sons from that marriage. She became pregnant and, on February 11, 1994, had a daughter named Nicole. For about the first year of Nicole's life, her father, Ronald, had custody of her, but then Miriam filed for custody. Ronald stopped having contact with Nicole when she was around 4 years old. Sometime later, Miriam married a man named Robert Dienes. The couple and Nicole lived in a single-story house in Tampa, Florida. Nicole graduated from high school and attended Florida State University in Tallahassee. She lived on campus throughout her freshman year. She moved back to Tampa to spend the summer of 2015 with her mother and stepfather. Nicole was preparing to return to Florida State University for her sophomore year. She was late submitting her application to get a dormitory room. Classes were set to start on August 24, and she was concerned about not having a place to stay. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On August 19, 2015, 21-year-old Nicole was at the family house in Tampa with her 67-year-old stepfather, Robert. 56-year-old Miriam was out of town. Nicole retrieved Robert's pistol from his nightstand and shot him once in the back of the neck as he was standing in the kitchen. Robert did not survive. Nicole dragged his body to a bedroom and tried to clean up the scene. Not long after this, Nicole found out that she could secure an overflow dormitory room where she could stay until a traditional room became available. She visited her cousin and borrowed $100 for the overflow dormitory room fee. She told her cousin that she was going to travel to Tallahassee, but instead she returned to the family house in Tampa. On August 20, Miriam returned to the house at around 9:20 p.m. Nicole confronted her, and Miriam ran away from the house. Nicole shot her mother twice in the torso and once in the head. Miriam did not survive. Nicole left the scene and drove to Tallahassee. At some point, she disposed of the firearm. It was never recovered. A neighbor called 911 after hearing the gunshots and a scream. The neighbor called again after seeing Miriam's body on his driveway. The police arrived at the scene and found the body. They did not immediately know that it was Miriam. The police checked other houses in the area, which of course included Nicole's residence next door. When they knocked on the front door, it opened. The police entered and found a bedroom that was locked. They pried the door open with a screwdriver and found Robert's body in the room. The police spoke to Nicole on the phone. She said that she had been in Tallahassee. The police learned that Nicole did not check into her dormitory room until not long after 9 a.m. on August 21. They realized that she was not telling them the truth. The police arrested Nicole for murder. She declined to answer questions without a lawyer, but then went on for hours talking about movies like The Snow Queen and Rise of the Guardians. At one point, she asked an officer, "Do you know any good jokes?" She then curled up on the floor and acted as though she was going to sleep. I guess committing 2 murders is a lot of work and can lead to fatigue. In 2019, Nicole was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now moving to my analysis. There is no question that Nicole shot and killed her stepfather and then her mother sometime later. Her defense didn't even try to argue that Nicole wasn't the shooter. The issue at the trial was really about Nicole's state of mind. Her defense argued that Nicole was not guilty by reason of insanity. They said that she had schizophrenia and battered child syndrome. Was Nicole actually guilty of these murders? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that Nicole was guilty, starting with the inculpatory evidence. Nicole used her stepfather's gun to kill him. She moved his body and attempted to clean the area where she shot him. She borrowed money from her cousin and lied about where she was going. After returning to the family house, she parked her Toyota Prius 1.7 miles away to maintain the element of surprise. When her mother arrived home, Nicole shot and killed her. Nicole confessed to her half-brother. There is no evidence that Robert was ever physically violent toward Nicole. Miriam may have been, but there are no witnesses to that. Nicole engaged in a number of complex tasks around the time of the murder, which seemed to be inconsistent with having psychosis. For example, she destroyed evidence, borrowed money, drove to Tallahassee, and lied to the police. She even mentioned to the police that there were a lot of people who didn't like her mother, like she was trying to derail the investigation. A mental health clinician for the state said that Nicole did not report any psychotic symptoms. She did not have schizophrenia. Rather, she had 3 personality disorders: schizotypal, borderline, and avoidant. So 1 from each cluster A, B, and C. In addition, Nicole had adjustment disorder with depressed mood. Moving to the exculpatory evidence, one mental health clinician for the defense testified that Nicole had schizophrenia. Nicole had several behaviors that appeared to be consistent with having hallucinations and delusions. For example, Nicole believed that she was already dead. At college, she observed signs on the wall and thought they had a special meaning for her. This is referred to as having ideas of reference. Nicole reported uncontrollable and loud screaming in her head. She had voices that turned into nightmares, and her uncle observed her talking to herself a year before the murders. Nicole did not want to be treated for schizophrenia. She did not believe that she had it. This is a common response from people who have schizophrenia. The disorder is egosyntonic, meaning the individual thinks of the symptoms as aligned with their values. They don't have the insight to realize that their behavior is unusual or maladaptive. Another mental health clinician for the defense said that Nicole had battered child syndrome. There was quite a bit of evidence that supported the allegation that Miriam mistreated Nicole. For example, Miriam frequently admonished Nicole for not living up to expectations. She called her names like worthless daughter. Miriam thought that Nicole was overweight and often commented on this. She may have forced Nicole to get liposuction. Some of Nicole's behavior could be considered consistent with her mother mistreating her. Nicole was extremely isolated. She resented her mother. She was described as submissive and meek, and she took unusual steps to lose weight, as if she was responding to the pressure from her mother. Nicole attempted to hide her appearance under multiple layers of clothing. Sometimes she would wear 3 jackets. To exercise, she would ride her bicycle to classes and walk around the campus with weights strapped to her ankles. Nicole appeared to be lost in a world of fantasy. She published fan fiction about Elsa from the movie Frozen, as well as other animated characters. When she moved to the dormitory for her freshman year of college, she arrived without any family members. She slept almost all day and stayed up almost all night. She spent a lot of time typing on her laptop. She ordered coloring books based on the movie Frozen, and she dyed her hair blonde, like Elsa from that movie. Her dormitory roommate said that she knew something was wrong with Nicole from the beginning. Nicole appeared to be afraid of how her mother would respond to failure. For example, when she did not get good grades in college, she falsified her transcript to reflect perfect grades. When considering all of the evidence, do I think that Nicole was guilty? Yes, I believe that she was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Her crimes were planned, and she took efforts to escape responsibility. Her stepfather never hurt her at all, and Nicole could have easily escaped from her mother. Nicole was not justified in her actions. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. It does not appear as though Nicole had schizophrenia, but she did appear to have odd beliefs, bizarre thinking, ideas of reference, and was lost in fantasy. Her behavior does appear to line up well with schizotypal personality, but not so well with borderline or avoidant. There's not a lot of evidence available to support those disorders, but of course the clinician who assessed Nicole would have had access to more evidence. Nicole had been repeatedly criticized by her mother. She did not have good coping skills. The stress was getting to her. When Nicole realized that she may not get a dormitory room, she decided to kill her mother to avoid the criticism. I think her stepfather was murdered simply because he was in the way and she needed his gun. Now moving to my last item. This is the conflicting testimony about mental health in this case and how it relates to legal insanity. The mental health clinician for the state tried to argue that Nicole had severe dissociative symptoms, which is one criterion for borderline personality disorder. I find this curious because dissociative symptoms are sometimes difficult to distinguish from psychosis. There is the sense that none of the mental health clinicians involved in this case really understood what was going on with Nicole, but testified as if they were very confident in their clinical assessments. This is yet another case that shows the weakness of mental health assessment when applied to legal situations. Mental health clinicians are good at treating people, but they're not good at figuring out why people engage in criminal behavior or if people are lying. I think that the behavior of mental health clinicians during trials like this one can send a bad message. Here's what I mean by that. Mental health clinicians for the state often take the position that a defendant has a personality disorder. They seem to prefer antisocial, but if they can't diagnose that disorder, they will settle for borderline, narcissistic, or histrionic. So, any disorder from cluster B. The message they are unintentionally communicating is that people with personality disorders are somehow responsible for their own situation, and personality pathology is no excuse for bad behavior. It does not diminish responsibility in any way. Almost like a personality disorder is not a legitimate mental disorder. If the person has schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, then legal insanity is a possibility, but if they have a personality disorder, send them to prison. I think much of this testimony occurs because of how the courts view legal insanity. The definition varies by jurisdiction, but in general, for a person to be legally insane, they must prove that as a result of mental disease, they were functionally impaired in a legally relevant way at the time of the crime. Personality disorders are excluded as supporting a finding of legal insanity, despite the fact that a personality disorder reflects a long-standing maladaptive pattern that compromises functioning. When looking at the research literature, it becomes clear that there is no reasonable scientific basis upon which to exclude personality disorders from being eligible for consideration related to an insanity defense. Any categorical exclusion of personality pathology is arbitrary. In addition, as we see in the case of Nicole, there is no reliable way to distinguish personality disorders from other mental disorders that would be eligible. The archaic rules of the criminal justice system in relation to mental health have led to this terrible situation where mental health professionals appear to testify to get a particular outcome more so than based on a valid assessment. They accuse defendants of being lost in fantasy despite residing in a fantasy world they have constructed around their own clinical abilities. Those are my thoughts on the case of Nicole Nachtman. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.